Last week we talked about the characteristics of being a wise man, and then I asked, how can you tell when you're not being wise? And irritation is a great indicator. This really does separate real from imitation wise men. People can be pretty dense, all of us, resistant, and then even deny that they're doing it. So if you're trying to help somebody, trying to love and teach them, especially the teaching part, it can be a little provoking to frustration. So it's easy to justify your frustration with somebody who's not listening, but the instant you become frustrated, you're useless as a wise person. Another indicator for not being wise is disappointment and discouragement, which are different. They reflect different kinds of expectation. Disappointment is an expectation that you have of them, the people that you're helping, whereas discouragement is an expectation that you have of you. These are hard. In order to help somebody, you really have to be emotionally attached to them. You get that? I mean, you have to care about them. So when somebody utterly fails to receive the loving and teaching that you offer, some level of disappointment or discouragement is normal. But just because something is normal doesn't make it productive. So you have to lay it aside. What's the solution? You cannot set goals for another person. No expectations. So disappointment, for example. You have no right to tell someone how they should learn and grow. It's arrogant. I work with people every day who are waiting, just sitting there with bated breath for me to be disappointed in them because they're slow. And they'll say, well, I'm slow, you're going to be disappointed. I don't sugarcoat it. I tell them, you are slow. After a lifetime of pain and not seeing any choices other than unloving ones, you are slow. But I'm not impatient, because I see the pain. I see where the slowness comes from, and I'm not impatient with it. Discouragement comes when you believe that you are, in the language of kids nowadays, that you are all that it's you who changes people. Wrong. Love is what changes people, plus their faith. You're just a delivery boy or a delivery girl. You're the pizza guy. You didn't make the pizza. You just create the possibility for change. Now, that's a lot. That's a lot to do. But you're still not in charge of change. There's a whole lot more involved than you. Another indication that you're not being wise is that you feel defensive when you're attacked. And let me tell you a little secret if you want to be a wise man or a wise woman. People will attack you. As you engage in the process of loving and teaching people, you're revolutionizing people's lives. So that's going to be upsetting. And some people aren't going to like it. They're going to become afraid. And then what do you think they're going to do? Defend themselves and attack. And boy, you're right there. So they're going to attack you. So what do? Listen to them. Accept them. I can still remember, I hadn't thought about it in years, but years ago, I've done, 1,600 probably radio and television shows. And there was a time when I was doing several a day, actually. And I got on a large radio station in Boston. And the host of the radio show, his name was, you'd think I'd have caught on from his name. His name was Nasty Nut. I have a feeling that's not the name his mother gave him. And this guy absolutely bent over backwards to be irritating, obnoxious, annoying, abrasive for half an hour. At the end of the show, he said, okay, I've been doing radio now for 25 years or whatever it was. I don't remember the exact number. And he said, in all these years, I have never failed to irritate a guest. He said, this guy's not irritated, so I recommend you all go out and buy his book. It's really disarming to people when you don't respond to an attack by defending yourself. So expect that you're going to be attacked. If you do respond less than loving, well, fine, admit it. But you focus on their judgments rather than about how it affects you. So if they're angry, say, okay, it's obvious you're angry. That's always about fear. What are you afraid of? So notice, just by saying that, that addresses their feelings and judgments all at once. Another indication of not being wise is pride in our success. It's very satisfying to see somebody's life change. And so it's very tempting to take credit for that, especially when they give credit to you. So you need to expect that. You're going to hear people say after a lifetime of being miserable and you love them and they feel it, that they're going to say something like, oh, you're so wonderful. So what do you do with that? It ain't you. Just like I said about discouragement, you ain't all that. We can channel, we can divert some of the infinite flow of the river of real love that we've talked about before to other people. We can pass it on. But it's really very useful to remember that, if you like, you're just the ditch. You ain't the river. You just pass on the water that was already in the river. So what can you do when you feel proud of somebody else's success? You remember the ones that you got nowhere with. You can't take credit just for the successes or just for the failures. So if you're going to take credit for somebody's success, then you have to take credit for all the failures. And it turns out you're not really responsible for either one. And another thing you can do is to remember that they grow because they chose to trust. You only loved and taught. Without their trust, nothing would happen. Remember the PowerPoint where we talked about how you can tell just a little bit ago when somebody's not being wise. And we listed all these things. Notice that numbers 1, 2, and 4 are really just two sides of the same thing. We're looking for praise. If people fail to praise us, we're disappointed. If they do praise us, then we're proud. We just need to be aware of the fact that it's pretty tempting to look for people's praise. Another way you can tell that you're not being wise is fear. That you can't do it right, that you'll screw up. I've told this story on a number of occasions, but probably not here, about how years ago, I was on the CPR team, like you see on emergency room shows where somebody comes in and they code the person and there's somebody pushing on the chest and somebody injecting this and somebody intubating the patient. And it's a real team of people. And there's somebody who's really not doing any of those things. They're just directing them. And I've had that job many times. And on one occasion, a young intern was trying to put a tube down the person's throat whose heart had stopped. And I watched him for, 10 or 15 seconds. It's not like you have all day when somebody's heart has stopped. And I finally said, what are you doing? And the intern said, well, I'm afraid to hurt him. Because you see, when you put a tube down somebody's throat, if you put it down wrong, you can tear off one of their vocal cords. So it's not just an innocuous procedure. And I said, maybe a little louder than I needed to, he's dead. How are you going to hurt him? So the intern then rammed the tube down the guy's trachea and he survived. We tend to be anxious that perhaps we're a rookie, that we might make mistakes. Well, you might, but the person that you're talking to usually has got you on the phone because at least in that moment, and perhaps for a lifetime, they've already been emotionally dead. So how are you going to make it worse? How else do you get over this fear of making mistakes? The key to being a wise person, wise man or woman, is to focus entirely on the other person. We talked about this when we talked about listening. That's the key to listening. It's disarming. I talked to a woman recently who had been suicidal and raging and pretty much scaring everybody around her, her family, the people on Facebook. It just went on and on because she could just really terrorize people with her fear, her anger, her accusations, and so on. I ignored all that and just paid attention to her. She attacked me viciously. I mean, she just went right at me and went, attacked me through my father, grandfather, and, all of my ancestors. But instead of defending myself or lighting my hair on fire just because she did, I just focused on her. So how do we focus on people? We listen. Nobody ever listened to this woman. That's why she was raging. That's why people get angry. They've actually tried to get people to listen to them from the time they were little children. Nobody listened. Listen, as I've said before, listen to a little kid in the checkout line at Walmart. Mama, mama, mommy, mommy, mommy. Well, eventually the kid goes to screaming because nobody's listening. And that's why we scream as adults, because nobody's listening. We also have to have no fear. If we're afraid, we can't love, period. If you're afraid, you can only protect yourself. So it absolutely disqualifies you as a wise person. Another thing about being a wise person is faith. And this might be the thing, that and focus on the other person. Faith in the right things. Faith in the power of truth as opposed to, say, manipulation, or lying, or defending ourselves, or attacking the other person, or trying to get them to do something. Faith in the power of the truth. Faith in the power of love. And even faith in the other person. Often people resist all attempts that I have to love and teach them. I don't get excited. I don't get disappointed, because I really have a deep, abiding faith, what one author called a red-hot faith, that people are going to get it if they're loved long enough. So you don't get excited when you fail. So what if you're in a group, because our subject has been not just being a wise man or woman, but being in a group as a wise man or woman. What do you do if another wise man is ineffective? Because that's going to happen. In group, sometimes somebody speaks and then a person steps up to be a wise man or woman, but they're not capable of it. It's pretty obvious. They're not loving or teaching well. Sometimes it's inexperienced. Sometimes they're arrogant. Sometimes they're controlling, trying to fix the other person. So what if a wise man in the group is bossy, fixing, and not listening? What do you do? Because I get asked this question a lot. It happens often enough. A lot of approaches. First is let it happen. People get to make mistakes. That's how they learn. Don't correct them in front of everybody. Pretty much everybody hates that. The law of choice. Everybody gets to choose what they think, say, or do. We're not here to control people, including other wise men. But there are other things you can do. You can love and teach the person who spoke, just like the mistake never happened. What matters is loving and teaching the speaker, not correcting the wise person. Remember, the speaker's the center of the event. So I was on a conference call not long ago, and the wise person just blew it. Just missed what the speaker was saying, taught them the wrong principle, wasn't especially patient, loving. So I simply spoke and loved and taught the speaker. The wise person who felt corrected, even though I didn't correct her, interrupted finally. I think she waited till I was done. She said, "So how long have you been doing this?" I said, "I don't know, about 20 years, I guess." She said, "Well, that's a long time." Well, I didn't hang around at the end of the call. I just hung up. And then apparently later she said to people, "Who was that?" There was no need for me to step in and correct her or to tell her that I was the author. Crap. All that matters is the speaker. The other thing you can do is ask the speaker if they're feeling understood and loved. Now, you could do this after the first wise person's attempt or after yours or both. So to bring it to a conclusion, you would say to the speaker, are you feeling like you've been heard and understood and loved? If they do, well, then it's probably good. You don't need to keep gilding the lily, so to speak. So we talked about the job of being a wise person. Let's talk now about the job of being the speaker. As a speaker in the group, you only have one job. And as wise men, it's useful for us to remember this, that they only have one job. Their job isn't to be brilliant, isn't to absorb the principles. Their job is to trust. Trust what? Pretty easy, actually. It's difficult to feel warm and loved by trusting a principle or a process. Trust that the wise man is loving you. Even when there are moments that you kind of doubt, fear is the great killer. So it's the solution, not protecting. The solution is trusting. And boy, this is a tough one for people. Trust is very foreign to almost everyone, but it's much easier than the alternatives, which are doubt, fear, pain, misery, and so on. So how long do you try with people? How long do you try being a wise person? I've been doing this for 20 years, and I've learned that if people are not taking action, if they're not implementing what they've learned intellectually, the knowledge is useless. Often, as wise men and women, we waste. Waste is kind of a harsh word, but I'm not going to change it. Far too much time with people who are simply not ready to take the next step. Now, there's no blaming here. I'm not saying, gee, they're idiots, that they are a waste of time. No. But if somebody's not ready to take the next step, for example, I have an 8-month-old child, teaching the child to drive is just probably a waste of time. The child will eventually learn to drive. The child is not a waste of time, but teaching an 8-month-old child to drive, that is. So no blaming, because it wastes their time too. And it's just frustrating, you see? And the older I get, I'm just not willing to waste that time and effort, emotional and otherwise, anymore. I'd noticed that I was spending 80% of my time with 20% of the people that I was talking to. I don't do that anymore. I had a coach call and say that his client was growing 0. So what would I do differently now with all I've learned? Well, first I said that I would tell the client that trust means doing. Trust means not doing it his way. Whereas the client would always stop and say, I'm afraid, I'm afraid, I'm afraid, I'm afraid. Well, then you're not trusting. And you don't have to. You may not be ready to trust, but I'm not going to keep working with somebody who repeats back, I'm afraid, no matter what I say. They're not ready to do this. And second, I give him assignments to complete with his partner, with his children, in the workplace, things to actually do. And if somebody that you're being a wise person to consistently doesn't do what you suggest as an assignment, which is only for their benefit to implement what they're learning, then eventually I'd suggest you just recognize what's really going on, that they're really not all that interested in learning, even though people will protest, oh, I really, really, really want to get this. Yeah, it's kind of like me saying I really, really, really want to win the marathon in the Olympics. I'll take one look at my eating and exercise habits, and it's kind of obvious that I'm really not all that interested. So what do you do when people, this is a common problem in groups. I probably get asked this about groups more often than any other question. What do you do when people launch into stories, endless stories, in fact, with endless words, or they fight you, or they tell you what they think? Oh, golly, every group, there's somebody who goes, now, after you've explained a principle and you've loved it, well, now I think, there are a lot of different things you can do, but I use a metaphor often of a bridge. I built a bridge in my backyard. I know what it takes to build a bridge. So I've built a 40-foot bridge across the creek in my backyard. It replaced a bridge I built 30 years before, which just kind of wore out with weather and time. I've built a bridge. You've never built a bridge of any kind, not a 3-foot bridge between two chairs. And I tell you, you ask me how to build a bridge, and I tell you, and then you tell me, well, I think, I don't really care. You never built one. So I point out often to people that their bridge just ain't working. So why not try the approach of somebody who's built a bridge? I don't care if it's me. I don't care if you like my way of bridge building at all. And I also like to remind people that it's not about thinking. It's about trusting and feeling. Thinking got us where we are now. Not working. So I'm going to just kind of blab what appears to be randomly here about some of the practicalities of being a wise person. I'm really sad, no kidding, when people don't respond to loving and teaching, because these people are all in pain, but there are a lot of them. The concept of unconditional love unavoidably attracts people who believe that they then don't have to do anything. They're attracted because the word unconditional implies, although it doesn't state it, it implies they don't have to do anything. But what they don't understand is that people don't have to do anything to get loved, but they do have to take action to feel loved. Instead of trusting, many people love to be offended. It's what they know. They defend. I met a man once in China, probably a year ago. And after several months, I just wrote him an email and asked him how he was doing, just because I cared about him. He wrote back a 2 or 3 page email about what he was doing with his life and with his business and so on. And I wrote back and said, way to go, you're doing a lot. Keep going. I admire your faith and courage. And he wrote back and blew up. Said, I'll never trust you again. I'll never tell another person about real love because I wrote you an hour-long email, which I didn't ask for, and you responded with only 2 lines. Yeah. This guy obviously loves to be offended, and many people that you work with as a wise person are going to love that. When people react badly, we tend to think that we made a mistake, but that is not necessarily so. Just because somebody reacts badly to your attempts to love does not mean you made a mistake, but you have to be willing to consider the possibility. So when somebody tells me that I was a horse's butt in working with them, I always pause and go, was I? Could I have done that better? Could I have been more patient? Could I have listened better? Maybe so. But most of the time I don't care. Sounds kind of harsh. I'm giving you the best I've got. No kidding. I don't ever get on a call and go, I'm going to dial it down and give you my B game. Really? I'm loving and teaching you as well as I know how. And if that was imperfect, tough. It was the best I had. I'm still willing to learn from it. But all I can do is learn to be a little wiser, a little more loving all the time. That's all you can do. You learn to love and teach better. That involves mistakes. So, you listen to people, but you don't take it personally. As a wise man, your ability to love and teach often grows gradually. Just keep at it. In fact, it's not even a reasonable goal to become a wise man all the time. I've been asked how long it took me to learn to be loving. And I say, well, I'll let you know when I get there. I don't even have a goal to be loving. Really, I don't. I have a goal to be a little more loving than yesterday, a little less stupid than yesterday, to be as wise and loving as I can intermittently, and then to increase the length and frequency of those episodes where I'm loving. That's really all I got. almost everybody will have an idea of what they need. This will help you as a wise person. And as you talk to people, the crazy thing is they're coming to you for help, but then they tell you how to give it to them. And if you don't give it to them in that way, then they tend to be disappointed or irritated. It's kind of like, and I've seen this, somebody pulls over on the side of the road and they say, I'm lost. Can you give me directions to Joe's house? And so I say, yeah, you go up the street and you turn left. And then, I'm not kidding, I've actually had people say, no, I don't think that's the way. And I'm thinking, didn't you just tell me you were lost? And that happens for wise men and women pretty much every day. They're lost, they ask you for directions, and then they tell you no or but. But see, if they're in pain and blind, how could they possibly know what they need? They don't even know how blind they are. You are the wise man. That doesn't make you better than anybody. But if they called you and asked you to help them, then that's your role. So you do the best you can to see them and love them. What they want is often exactly what will not help them. Because what people tend to want is comfort. They want ease. They want familiar. And last of all, probably worse, they want magic. And you can't give them any of those things, not and genuinely help them. So as wise people, we need to give people what they need, not what they want. Now, isn't it selfish to refuse somebody what they want? No. In fact, it's often the most loving thing. What if you gave a young child everything he wanted? Well, then he'd never go to school. He'd only eat chocolate cake and ice cream. What people want is often the worst thing. You also can't keep giving when it would empty and exhaust you, no matter how needy somebody else is. So you are not obligated to give as much as somebody needs, only as much as you can and as much as you choose. It doesn't matter that the other person tells you what they need. You're not obligated any more than it would be just as reasonable that a rape victim is obligated to give what the attacker says he needs. It can be that crazy because some people will bleed you dry. They don't mind at all. Well, if this will kill you to help them, they go, well, okay, that's a reasonable price. You have to be willing to say no. No to sympathy, no to agreeing with a position, no to their comfort, no to their demands for magical cures. You have to mean it. Your no has to be honest. Or frankly, your yeses won't mean as much. So it's very common when I get on a phone call with people that they will say, is this a good time? After I had scheduled the call. People usually only do that with me once because I say, if this wasn't a good time, you and I wouldn't be speaking. So how do you know what people need? Wise men teach principles, not opinions. This is important. I hear people say, when I think, nobody really cares what you think. What people care about is whether you love them and whether you keep telling them what's true, which is why it's really useful to use things. That's the biggest reason I suggest people read the real love books, is so that they just have a grasp of true principles, or that they use the pearls. Just have a deck of pearls on the desk in front of you so that if you're not sure what to say, flick through the pearls. You're going to come across within 2 to 3 attempts at most, you're going to come across a principle that will apply to the person that you're talking to, that will work with somebody. And you notice that on many occasions, you could use any of them. Another thing that will help you, give people assignments. See, understandably, they're in pain and they want you to do all the work. I get that. But if you do the work, they don't get the rewards. See? So you've cheated them. Sometimes people will ask me a question. They'll say, so what do I need to do to trust? And I've answered that question 20 times. And I say, fascinating question. Why don't you answer it for me? I'll be happy to edit it, but you're going to have to come up with an answer. Give them something to do. Sometimes people aren't growing at all. And you ask them, well, so how many meaningful real love calls have you made in the last week? Well means none. Really, that's the translation. It doesn't matter what they say after well. And I stop them after well. I go, oh, none. So I'll give them assignments like, all right, so here's the deal. I'm either willing to give you a lot of my time and effort and love or none. But I'm not willing to play around in that useless land of half commitment. So if you'll make a phone call to me or to another wise person every single day for 30 days, then okay, I'll participate. And that's when you find out whether people are serious. Or like I said to a couple tonight, she was irritated. He didn't like it. He was going to run away. And I said, what could you do right now that would make a difference? Well, he's always run away. I said, you don't know. So I'll give you an assignment. You reach over and just put your hand on her arm. That's it. That's the assignment. He said, well, I don't know if I can do that. I said, well, then you're not serious. Trust is demonstrated by how we behave, not by the words that we say. Now, another principle. It's going to help you a ton as a wise person. With many people, whatever you do will be too much or too little. Oh, you're going to find lots of occasions to use this. I refer to it as dialing up the emotional volume. So I always start at a level of 1, and I teach a principle very softly. And if people don't hear it, then I go to a 2, 3, 4. Nobody's listening. Nobody's home, in fact. No lights are on. And I dial it up to a 5, which just means I'm not yelling. It just means I'm more direct. And then right about a 5, with some people it's at a 2, then they're hurt. Their feelings are hurt. So I ask them, well, so they say, well, you didn't have to say it to me that harshly. I say, really? So did you recognize the 1, 2, 3, and 4 that went before this? They didn't. They didn't even hear it. And so I go through it with them. I said it to you at a 1, 2, 3, 4, and you didn't hear it. So now I have a question for you. How would you say it after you hadn't listened at 1, 2, 3, and 4? They never have an answer, ever. They know that they didn't like it, but they don't have a better way to do it. So I'm just saying, with many people, it'll always be too much or too little. Don't get really all that excited when they then blame you for turning the emotional volume up too loud. Another thing to consider as a wise person, real love really does go against the way we were raised. Pretty much the way everybody around us was raised. I've had people stand up in an audience of 1,000 and say, so you're telling us the whole world is wrong? Yeah, that's really not all that hard to say. Take a look around. Pick up a newspaper. People are either angry, afraid, or they're at the edge of angry or afraid all the time. It takes nothing to provoke them. Just because 1 million people are doing things wrong doesn't make them right. Just because 1 million flies are eating horse poop doesn't mean we should too. And yet that's the rationale that people use. The more people that are doing a thing, the more, and it's my favorite word, the more normal it is. People don't even know what the word normal means. It comes from the word norm, which means average. So yeah, it's average. That doesn't mean it's okay. It's normal for flies to eat horse poop, but I don't. Look at politics. More and more, our leaders don't make decisions based on what is right or wrong. In fact, you could go through an entire political campaign and not hear those words. Well, this is simply right. This is wrong. They take polls. So if 54% of the people believe that this is what we should do, well, then the president or whoever's running for president or whatever office stands up and goes, that's my position too, oddly, because they get more people to vote for them. And we think that personally. We think that I've watched endless couples. When one person is taking an indefensible position, what do? They call around to all their friends. Gee, this is going to be surprising. They call up their friends and they say, now here's what I think. What do you think? Gee, What's the subtext here? You can agree with me and be my friend, or you can disagree with me and I will excommunicate you forever. So it's pretty easy to gather votes. Really important as we're describing people's behaviors that our tone of voice is just, it's not really neutral. It's really more caring, but not excited or irritated or angry or even insistent, and certainly never disappointed. But still, even when you do that, there are people who are going to get defensive. And when they do, you love them more or you're dead. A couple of wise men tools. Sometimes people will question what you tell them, and they're going to need a reason why they should listen to you versus the million horseflies who are eating poop. Some useful responses that I've discovered over the years. Why would you listen to me? Because I'm not empty or afraid. Emptiness and fear is blinding, and your friends are just like you. They're empty and afraid. Look at their lives. So if they need something from you, or if they're afraid of your disapproval, which pretty much almost by definition, our friends need our friendship. Almost by definition, our friends fear our disapproval. So they're rendered blind. You say, I'm not empty or afraid. I don't need you to do anything. I'm not afraid of your reaction. So I'm not blind. And the last one is, what do I have to gain here? I know when I tell you what you need to hear most, I know you're going to be annoyed. Why would I intentionally do such a thing? Why would I intentionally provoke you to be angry at me so you'll hate me? Unless I really cared about you. It just doesn't make sense. I tell people I'm just helping you see that you're doing the same thing over and over. You're doing it wrong. I don't pussyfoot around the word. You're doing it wrong because it doesn't work. It doesn't make you bad. It just doesn't work. And if as a wise person, you make a mistake, who cares? That doesn't make you bad either. You learn by practicing. No matter how you practice, some people simply will not be ready to hear what you have to tell them, nor to receive the love that you have to give. So relax and have some faith in them. They might have to hurt more before they're willing to listen to you. Again, most powerful tools of a wise man. I've kind of alluded to them. I'm going to summarize them here. Love and faith. If I love you and I have faith in you, I'll be able to do more with that than all the knowledge of all the real love books, which I haven't read in ages and probably forgotten half the information in them anyway. Just need to love you and have faith in you. Huge. Now, sometimes we get kind of focused on stuff that we think is important, because often, I'm sorry to say, because you've heard me focus on it, or you've read it in a book, so you think it matters, when it's really kind of a secondary issue. Like, it's common to talk to people about how their parents didn't love them, which got them where they are. Some people absolutely cannot hear that. So there are some things you can do. You can say, so how did they treat you when you screwed up? Not how did they treat you when you were good? Or another thing I will use sometimes with people is to say, I don't need to know a single thing about how your parents treated you. The proof of how they treated you is sitting in front of me. You're it. Your emptiness and fear prove that you were not unconditionally loved. And I hasten to defend them. I say, hey, they loved you as well as they could. But sometimes people still can't hear this. And so drop the subject. It ain't that important. If they can't hear the subject that their parents didn't love them, I've seen wise men run themselves absolutely right into the ground on that subject. Just focus on what is right now. Talk to the person about how they feel. Talk to the person about how they interact with their children, with their spouses, with the people at work. That's usually enough. In fact, it's not uncommon that when people come here for an intervention, they'll be here for 3 whole days, and I'll realize at the end of the 3 days, I never asked them about their family once. We just dealt with what is, or what was, right then. didn't really matter all that much. You're going to help people see how they feel worthless now, which is at the root of everything. You don't really have to explain the why. You're going to tend to get an argument about all your explanations anyway. Just help them see that that's at the root of everything. You help them see that when they're angry, it's because they don't feel worthwhile. People who feel absolutely worthwhile to their core don't have to defend themselves. Really. I have a granddaughter who's 10 years old. She's just a kid. And I don't know if I could make her angry by arguing with her. She would just patiently look at me like I was a moderately retarded child, and keep explaining her position. And then if I didn't get it, she'd just kind of go, well, in fact, she's actually said this to me. She said, Grandpa, you'll get it. Just keep trying. It's very humbling, possibly humiliating to have a 10-year-old child tell you that. But I can't make her angry because she knows who she is. When we don't know who we are, when we feel worthless, it's pretty easy to make us angry. And we're afraid of making mistakes, which is another little piece of evidence that you can use to help people see that they don't feel worthwhile. If we felt worthwhile, what do we care about making mistakes? It's just something to learn from. Now, a key to being a wise person. I don't get to this usually for a while because don't want to scare anybody to death. But it's been my experience, at least in the last 10 years, that the single most important thing you can do as a wise man, the single most important thing you can do is to listen. I didn't make up love. Well, if I didn't, then who did? You can call it whatever you want to. I don't care. You can call it God or the universe or an infinite source or broccoli. I don't care. But there's a source of love that's way greater than me. And the most important thing that I do as a wise person is to listen. Really. That's it. I had a couple come here once. It's been a little while, but they came a very long distance. And after spending 3 days with them, the man on the morning of the third day, he had this smug little Cheshire cat grin on his face. And he said, "We've figured out what you do." And I thought, that's cool, because I haven't figured out what I do. I said, "Good, what is it?" He said, "Nothing." And I thought, I wonder if he knows what he's saying. So I said, "Well, tell me some more." He said, "You just sit there and you listen." And I thought, that's pretty smart. He said, "You listen, you don't think too much." And he didn't mean listen to them, although I did that too. He said, "You listen to something greater than yourself and get out of the way." And I thought, that's pretty good. The more we think, the more we get in the way of the flow, the source of all the love. It really is a flow. I'm not suggesting that there's a flow greater than all of us. I'm telling you there's a flow because I've been experiencing it for most of my life, but more especially in the last 10 years or so. And I have no need to persuade anybody to believe in God or religion or anything. I really don't. But there is a higher source. There is a higher power. There's an infinite something or God. Some people say they don't believe in God, and I'm going, I don't care. It's kind of like not believing in gravity. Okay, and it's still there. And I can deny gravity, but if I ignore it, that's going to really kind of get in my way when I do things like, step off cliffs and stuff. If you get very experienced as a wise person, you're going to hear people tell you more and more that they've hit some kind of ceiling in their growth. You'll only be able to take them so far. And then they just kind of quit growing. The first ceiling usually is trust in you. But The next ceiling is trusting in what I call God. Again, you can call it whatever you want, which is how we get to what I've described in a previous class, or maybe more than one. I call them the 5 truths. Call them whatever you want. But if you're functioning as a wise person for somebody, if you're loving them and teaching them, you're a parent. That's what a parent does. It's not really even metaphorical. No, you're their emotional and sometimes spiritual parent. If you happen to be a guy, and I do, and so I use my daddy loves me because I'm really not a very great mommy. So the people that I'm talking to, I teach them these 5 truths only to make what matters really simple. That's it. We get caught up in all the words. We read the books. I've had people argue real love philosophy with me, which I find especially boring because I'm really not all that attached to it anyway. So my daddy loves me, or any wise person in your life, whoever, Fred, doesn't matter. Well, I didn't invent love. So if I love you and it comes from something else, then you can call it whatever you want to, but then God loves me. This is on the part of the person that you're working with. If that's true, both of those, then I'm never alone. So I have everything I need and nothing to fear. And what am I left with? Gratitude. I'm so grateful. So simple, which is not the same as easy. Now, can you be happy without a belief in a higher power? Call it God. Yeah, you really can. I know lots of people who are and don't believe in God at all. I know one man, though, who he says, I have no belief in God. I don't want to talk about it. But then, as a wise person, he says that when he really hits a hard spot, he'll just get really quiet and he can hear the answer. And I'm thinking, okay, then call it the answer. If you don't have to believe in God, but if you develop a connection to the infinite source of love, call it whatever, can you become even happier? And equally loud, yes. If you don't have such a belief, I'll tell you how you can at least investigate the possibility. You don't have to. I'm just suggesting how you could do it if you've hit that ceiling that I talked about. And I'll do that as I tell you how you might talk to others about investigating the possibility. If you don't believe in God, again, for about the 100th time, I don't care, but you won't be able to help people with the second ceiling. Make sense? You're going to talk to people about trusting in a source greater than you, and you don't believe in a source greater than you. So that's going to be kind of hard to do. So let's suppose that you do not believe in God. So you're the person who's calling me as a wise person. I'll talk to you as though you called me, telling me that you've hit a ceiling in your happiness. So again, we're not trying to persuade anybody to believe in anything. So the first question I would ask, because I've done this a few times, and it's not a trick. I'm not trying to get somebody to the next step. I only do this if somebody says they've hit a ceiling and they want to know more. Then I'd be happy to tell you. Do you believe that I love you? Now, if you don't know that, then I haven't got much else to tell you. See? That's the first step. Remember? My daddy loves me. Do you believe that I love you? Next question. Do you believe that I invented love? That kind of looks kind of absurd, right? Kind of like Columbus invented America. Columbus just found America and drew a map to it. Same with me as a wise person. I just describe love. I don't really have anything to do with the generating of it. When I love you, I'm only giving you what I've already received. And what I've gotten from others is not enough. It's a flow. And it's not all just people. Now, I get a lot of love from people, but that's not enough to fill me up to the point where it overflows and fills you up, where I can give it to you. I get loved by what I call God. And if you wish, I'll help you feel that too. Up to you. but never try to convince people of the existence of God. Frankly, it's just annoying. And most people that I've talked to who have a resistance to the notion of God, especially religion, is because somebody did try to convince them. Somebody tried to shove it down their throat. Somebody made them go to church or recite a catechism or whatever. But if they want to know, you can help them. So what do? I just kind of skirt the whole issue of trying to convince them of anything and just suggest that they connect directly like I have. Really. So I suggest to wise people who do want to help those who are interested that we help people connect directly to God, not to your particular religious belief. So how do you do that? You just talk to God. I call it prayer. Some people call it meditation. Again, I don't care what you call it. Call it broccoli. But I just talk about praying. Many people haven't. Yeah, they prayed in church. They followed after the priest or the pastor or whatever. But most people have never really just talked. And so I sometimes teach people a really simple prayer. Sit, stand, lie, doesn't matter. Close your eyes or don't. Doesn't matter how you start. Doesn't matter how you address this divine power or God. You say something like, and again, I say something like, doesn't matter. My daddy loves me. My daddy says he feels loved by you. I'd like to feel that. So help me out. Help me feel that. Poof, end of prayer. It's that simple. I can't even count how many people have done this and in time, and I don't follow up in a pushy way. Well, would you? No, relax. Jeez. Eventually, as people do this, they often begin to feel something. And I don't really tell them what, or I really kind of ruin the experience for them, So it should be in the key of C. It's usually 3 to 4 angels. They're going to figure out what they figure out. No agenda. But many people do want to learn about God. They hit a ceiling and they want to know. Now, if you believe in God as a coach, then I would say this. You hold lives in your hands. This is no small thing. God is delivering these people into your hands. No kidding. If you don't believe in God, ignore the next several sentences I say. I don't care. Been ignored before. My children are practiced at it. You are the answer to these people's prayers, which is kind of humbling, but also empowering. And if you want to help people best, you'll be greatly assisted by listening to that source who sent these people to you. It's really very natural and cool. And as a result of this process, people have told me some remarkable things about their experience, about their journey. Here's one person who said, all my life I believed in God, but never felt loved by him, her, you choose. Now I do, and it's made a huge difference. Or I never believed in God, and now I'm feeling something, can't tell you quite what it is yet, and I feel less alone than I ever have. That's kind of how investigation goes. Do whatever you want, just describing an aspect of love that is available to you, a source of it, that's all. We're going to talk a little bit about victimhood, because it is such a common problem, especially in groups. So I get these calls all the time. Person speaks up in group, in this case we'll say a woman, doesn't really matter, and a victim can take over a group. In fact, one victim can destroy a group, no joke. If there's nobody there who's strong enough as a wise man or woman to love and teach this person, they can end groups single-handedly. Because victimhood is so powerful. So what do? What do you say? I'm going to give you some suggestions about some of the things you might say, keeping in mind that if you write them down word for word, now you're going to all have the PowerPoints, but if you memorize them word for word and think that this is like the answer, you're kind of missing the point. But for example, an example of what I might say is, honey, that's a lot of pain, because that's what you're talking about. People are always describing their pain in group, especially victims. And we get hung up on the words. Understand that it's about their pain. Say that it's about their pain. Honey, I get it. You hurt. You hurt more than anybody knows. In fact, you hurt more than you know. Well, at that moment, almost every victim is going, oh, freak me out. I'm being listened to. They like it. They quit talking. The only reason they've been talking and taken over every group and every family gathering and every conversation they've ever had is because people haven't been listening. But then you don't stop. Then I say something like, so the real question is, we got that you're in pain. Do you want to stay in it or do you want to get out of it? Because if you want to stay in it, you can do that by yourself. If you want to get out of it, there's something we can do. The first step to solving the pain is to understand the real cause. Now, this first little clause is fairly important because if you don't say it, people will feel like you're attacking them. You say, you do, or I tend to say something like this, you do not mean to do this. There is no blaming in this, no criticism. But you use so many words to describe your circumstances and your pain that you get lost in the forest of your words. Do you realize that you do that? I said that to a man just tonight. I asked him a simple question with his wife there, and he started going, rah, 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 but I mean, just like a motorboat with a rudder stuck in one position. He just kept going round, round, round. And I stopped him and said almost exactly this. I said, you're lost. You get to the end of talking. You don't know where you started. And the people around you sure don't. So, I continue, for your benefit, not mine, I'm willing to listen to you all day long, but it won't help you. Can you condense everything you said into 3 sentences or less? It's almost a law that if somebody can't say something really briefly and succinctly, they don't understand it. In science, it's actually has a name. They refer to it as scientific or mathematical elegance. So it turns out that, for example, in science, there are some very, very complicated ways to express a principle. Same in computer programming. You can get a computer to do a thing with 1 million lines of code, and you can get the computer to cooperate. You can get it to do what you want. But if you can do it in 1,000 lines of code instead of 1 million, it removes a whole lot of the future problems you're going to have as this program interacts with other programs. It's called elegance, simplicity. Until people can express themselves simply, till they can do it elegantly, they don't understand what they're talking about, and they get lost. So for your benefit, can you condense it into 3 sentences? And just in case you were wondering, it's really likely that you'll have to help them come up with those 3 sentences because they've been speaking confused and lost for their entire lives. And here you step in and say, well, say that in 3 sentences. They're going, they have no idea. So I'm going to give you an example of what 3 sentences might look like. So you might say, and these 3 sentences aren't going to apply to everybody, but here's two sentences that summarized what somebody was saying to me over a period of, at one point, I actually timed somebody who was describing their problem, their pain. And I can't remember the exact numbers now, but for kicks, I let them go on for something like 26 minutes, and which for me is like forever. And then I waited till they stopped. And then I summarized what they'd said, and it was either 2 or 3 sentences. And I said, is there anything important that I missed? No, they said. So I did the math later, and it turns out that I used 2,000 fewer words than they did. No, I don't mean 2,000, just fewer words. 2,000 times. They used 2,000 times more words than I did. You get in the picture? 2,000 times. And they had less clarity than I did. So more ain't necessarily better. So what I said was something like this. I don't remember exactly. All your life, you have not felt understood or loved. The pain has been unbearable. And it gets worse when your husband, child, boss, whoever, behaves in a way that communicates, I don't love you. They look stunned. That's what I've been trying to say my whole life. That's what you're there for as a wise person, is to help people see what they've really been trying to say, simply, elegantly, so now we can finally do something about it. And it's very cool to watch. Miracles happen. Marriages are all falling apart. There's yelling and there's distance, and you love people and teach them, and a couple walks away. I see this pretty much every week of my life. People who come here and their lives are a wreck, and now they feel close to each other. Children who are beyond teaching, who now feel loved and are loving to each other. People who are addicted to alcohol, drugs, porn. People who are alone, old, miserable. And it all changes with the power of the love that passes through you. The whole world's up in the air. People are lost. Pretty much the world is run by this philosophy, not what's right or wrong, not what's loving or not. It's I can do whatever I want to do. They've taken the law of choice to a chaotic, extreme, insane conclusion. And it's wrong. They don't know who to trust. They don't know where to find love. And you're it. You are the introduction that most people have to even the notion of trusting. So just for a sec, let's talk about trust, since it's so important. Trust means not doing things your way. So it's pretty common that I get a client who says, no, I trust you. And I say, no, you don't. Oh, no, I do. So you're one of those people who has actually convinced himself that if you say a thing often enough, and if you say it with enough sincerity, then it becomes true. It would be like me sincerely saying, I'm an apple. Well, it doesn't make me one. Or I can fly. It doesn't make that possible. But see, we've seen that all of our lives. People protest with enough sincerity or sometimes with enough venom and attitude, and then everybody backs off and goes, oh, well, it must be true. No. Trust means that whoever you're talking to listens and stops doing things their way. That's scary because they've been doing things their way for, in most cases, decades. Part of that is not defending your way. In fact, if you have to defend your way, doesn't that tell you something? People who do morally questionable things, and I'm not going to go into the guys who are addicted to porn, for example. You ask a guy if he uses porn, because these days I just ask them how often rather than if they're using porn, and they become defensive. And I'm going, if I accused you of working 3 days a week at the soup kitchen, I've never seen anybody become defensive about that, about doing something they know to be good. But if we're doing something that we're not really sure about, we tend to become really defensive. It's just one indication that maybe what we're doing isn't the right thing. Another way to recognize trust is trying something in a new way whether you understand it or not. See, as I talk to people as a wise person, very often they want me to explain why they should try something in a different way. And almost always I'll explain it once or twice, but after a while I go, more explanation is not going to do you any good. You either do it or you don't. And in fact, until you actually do a thing, you're never really going to understand it anyway. So I could explain to you all day long the peace that comes from not expressing anger to other people. Till I was blue, fell over and died. You wouldn't get it until on a single occasion. This happened to me. I can still remember the first time that somebody did something for which I would have cut their head off in the past. And I decided, I'm not going to respond with anger. I'm going to just accept them and understand them. I remember making that choice. It was a lot of years ago, but it was a big thing. And the peace that I felt on that occasion was just about indescribable. It was amazing. I sat there speechless, which for me is saying something, and thought, that was very cool. I could never have known what that was like, never, until I did it. And as a wise man or woman, you're going to pretty much have to tell people that. One way for you to make that happen is you're going to have to give assignments and follow up. If you don't give people, assignments aren't a test. It's not like the homework we got in school is going to be graded. They're simply practice opportunities. It's like basic training in the military. In basic training under relatively safe circumstances, they teach them how to do things so that when they're in combat, they won't be dead in the first 2 minutes of a firefight. It gives them an opportunity to practice in a relatively safe environment, principles that they're going to use later. That's what you're doing with people. You teach them a principle, then you give them an assignment to fulfill, and I would suggest that you give them an assignment that you're relatively certain they're going to succeed at. I want you to go home and not say a single unkind thing to your wife for the next 20 years. Might be too much. You make it doable. And then what that does is it increases their faith in the power of telling the truth, the power of love. It increases their trust in you. It is far better that they learn to trust, that everybody learns to trust deeply one person than to have a shallow trust of many. It is very common in the real love community for people when they're talking to somebody having a problem to say, well, how many calls are you making? Are you making a call every day? Are you using the list? Are you talking to a wide variety of people? And I'm going to suggest that, contrary to the opinions of many, that's often a mistake. And so I get called by people who say, well, should I be using the list, whatever magic list they're talking about? I'm not making fun of anybody's particular list. There are a lot of them out there. But that can be actually confusing. It's better to make one call where you feel deeply loved than many calls to people who don't really see you and love you. There are lots of people who use the list and they call people who are absolutely unprepared to be wise men and women, but whose names are on the list. And so they call, they get confused. They get told things that are just absolutely not helpful or untrue, or people are irritated with them or try to push them or control them or boss them around. And it ends up being counterproductive. So assign people to make calls for sure, but I actually give people the names of people that I suggest that they call. Or people will call me and they'll say, can I call this person, this person, this person? And I don't defend anybody. I don't. They'll say, can you call Susie? Can I call Susie? And I'll go, nope. Frida, yeah. Mark, nope. John, yeah. And I won't explain why. So if it ever gets back to you secondhand, because I keep waiting for that, for somebody to call me and say, I hear that you told somebody not to call me. I probably genuinely won't remember. But if I did, I'm never going to explain to you why, so you will have no idea why. It may be because you're just flat not prepared to be a wise person. It may be because you're not the best wise person for him or her. So it's not meant to be critical. Just our purpose is to love people. It's to help them not to be afraid. It's to foster their trust. You're going to discover as you give people assignments that sometimes they don't complete an assignment. Find out why. The answer is the same, always is. They're afraid. When people call you and they say, I'm upset, I'm frustrated, I'm whatever, it's fear. When people have emotional energy, they're motivated by fear or pain, which is pretty much the same thing. Fear paralyzes us. One of the reasons to give assignments is to help people get over their fear, because it turns out there's nothing that you fear, pretty much, that can hurt you as much as your fear of that thing. So sometimes when people tell me this is what I'm most afraid of, oh, well, there's your assignment. Because as long as I'm afraid, I'm hedged in by a wall of that fear. Well, it doesn't take a math genius to figure out that it only takes, well, a minimum of 3 walls to create a triangle, 3 fears, and you're hedged in completely. Well, most people have dozens, so it doesn't take very long to get hedged in. We have to knock the walls down, and the walls are knocked down by moving through the fear, which results from trusting, and usually trusting you. So don't dismiss their fears, but do something about them. So if you tell me that you're afraid, I'm probably going to say I completely understand why you would be afraid. That you might experience more pain, more loss, that you might feel more alone. I get that. So you have to listen to people's fears first and understand them, or they're not going to hear anything else you say. If you say, oh, well, don't be afraid, you just disqualified yourself. They're not going to listen to you. But then I continue. You need to be far more afraid of staying the same and experiencing the certainty of your lifetime of pain. So people, when they're afraid, they're always telling you what might happen. Well, I'm looking at you and I'm telling you it's a certainty. You're miserable now. And if you don't do something that requires trust, you're going to stay that way. So yeah, I get your fear, but I'd be far more afraid of where you are now because you're going to stay that way. Huge obstacle to trusting is thinking. Most of us, from the time we were born, we talked about this as we talked in a lesson about post-childhood stress disorder, PTSD. Our heads have been filled with pain, judgments, wrong ones. And so when we think, we just stir up old events, judgments, feelings, behavior. It's a disaster. If you want a visual on this, from the time we were little kids, our heads were filled with poop. So when you think, you just stir it up and it stinks more. It's a huge obstacle to trusting, thinking. Solution? This isn't real tough. No thinking. Now, how do you know people are thinking? Even if you're on the phone, you can tell. They're quiet. You say something that really obviously would require a response if you were having just a non-fearful conversation. There's silence. There's a pause. So when there's a pause, what do you say? You're thinking again. I can smell the smoke coming out of your ears. No thinking. Thinking has served you all these years to survive. Thinking's great for survival, but it really sucks for being happy. Keeps you from living. Great for survival, terrible for living. So we were talking some time ago about what do you do when people launch into their stories, or they fight you, or they tell you they think. And we talked about the analogy of the bridge. And then we talked about just trusting and feeling. And that's where we've gotten to here. It's all about trust. So what if you're a perfect wise man? Does real love always work? No. Some people are so hurt and easily offended they can't hear a single thing you're saying. And I'm sad about them, but there are a lot of them. We're there to help people learn to trust us, to give them opportunity, give them a place that's safe enough where they can trust us, where they can get the initial whiff of what trust is like, the taste, if you like. Sometimes as you counsel people and you're trying to teach them to be trusting, it can be risky and they'll be offended. So what do you do if people are offended? Because that's going to happen. So it helps you just to at least think about what your response is going to be. Sometimes I will say to people when they're offended at what I say, are you happy? Really simple. Because if you're not happy, then you might consider the fact that being offended isn't going to help you. And then I continue. I don't know everything. I am far from everything. I'm not any better than you are, but I do know how to be happy. And I'm not asking for your blind trust. I'm suggesting that you just try what I'm suggesting. Like, really try it. Here's an important key just to understanding what it's like to be a wise person. If you need people to like you, you can't help them grow. You become useless. Because what you'll do is you'll say things to them to get their praise, to get their approval, to get their friendship, and they don't need another friend. They've already got friends who are keeping them in the same rat hole that they've been in all their lives. They need a wise person. In effect, they need a parent. And this is really good advice for parents too. Your kids don't need another friend. They got plenty. They can always text, put out a Facebook plea and get another one. No, they need a parent, just as people need you. We talked about how with many people, what you do is going to be too much or too little. So another part of that we didn't talk about before is that people tend to truly change only when you help them change the patterns of a lifetime step by step. You can't tell them everything that they need to hear all at one time. They're just not capable of hearing it. So you do it a little bit here and a little bit there. When you're telling people about their getting and protecting behaviors, for example, those are the things that they do wrong as in unproductive. And all their lives, the people around them have told them what they do wrong. And some people will become offended at that. So what's the difference between you're telling Susie, or whoever it is, that she's wrong, and other people, parents and others, telling Susie that she's wrong? Other people tell Susie she's wrong because they want something from her. And this is what you're going to tell her. When she acts offended, you're going to say, you think I'm your mother. You think I'm your father. You think I'm the people around you who told you that you were bad when you made a mistake. I'm just telling you you're making a mistake and it's hurting you. See the difference? It's huge. And if you can't articulate that, you're going to look defensive. So when somebody says, you've offended me, if you don't know what to say, you're going to come across as trying to be right. You have to be prepared to say, the difference is I'm trying to help you, honey. You're telling Susie she's wrong because you're helping her to be happier. So a possible tool to use in a circumstance like that is to say to Susie, what do I have to gain here? By telling you what would make you happier. What do I have to gain here? Especially when I know that what I'm telling you is going to make you irritated at me. And to tell her, perhaps over and over again, that being wrong doesn't make her bad. In fact, it's good to get practice being wrong and feeling loved. You have to be kind of careful then as people make mistakes and as they succeed in doing something. If you're more pleased with people when they're good. So you give them an assignment, they come back, they filled the assignment. If you're all giddy and happy, and you're not all giddy and happy when they didn't do the assignment, you're going to be communicating the same thing everybody in their life has communicated, which is, I like you more when you do the right thing. But it is okay to say, I'm so happy for you. Some people are simply not ready to hear what you have to tell them or the love you have to give them. Again, we talked about this before. Relax and have faith. Try again later. Pretty much don't quit. Now, eventually some people really don't want to hear what you have to say, and there are other places you could spend your time. We've talked a lot at length about the different ways you can be a wise person, and some of the things you can say, some of the what might even sound like techniques, some of the ways to tell when you're not being a wise person. But if I had to tell you just one thing, it would be just listen. Don't get involved in the words or the techniques or the how. Focus on them. Listen to what they say. Listen to their pain. Communicate to them that you understand their pain. Listen to the infinite source of love and wisdom. And then, I guess last of all, be willing to make lots of mistakes. You will. And although you care about the happiness of other people, you can't really care all that much if you make a mistake. Because you got to remember, all you're doing is creating an opportunity for people to feel loved and happy. You're not making them anything. So you don't make them happy. You don't make them miserable. So if you do make a mistake, which is inevitable in the process of learning, you are not responsible, even if you make a mistake, for hurting them, which is not the same as not caring about them. It's a lot of fun being a wise person. It's a lot of fun teaching real love to people. It's a lot of fun living real love. Couldn't possibly recommend it highly enough. So I really admire you for participating in this, for being willing to learn more about real love and to share it with other people. And, God bless you, and have fun while you're learning to do all this. Thanks a lot for being here for 10 weeks.